Hi, this is your host Swapnil Bharti and welcome to another episode of TFR Newsroom. And today we have with us once again Archis Gore, Chief Technology Officer at Polyverse. Archis, it's nice to have you on the show again.
Thank you for having me, Swapnil.
Polyverse recently joined the OpenSSF Foundation. It's a Linux Foundation. What I want to know from you is, can you tell me a bit about what is OpenSSF all about?
So the Open Source Security Foundation is all about promoting security of and using open source, but primarily of the open source software because open source software is collaboratively built, right? And so it doesn't have an owner, it doesn't have a vendor, or all of us are owners, really. And so what that means is typically enterprise Linux or enterprise companies are exceptionally secure, right? And they make these secure distributions and they do a really good job. But when it comes to sort of, let's think of OpenSSL as a great example, right? I think that's what began these talks. There's Heartbleed, but then who owns OpenSSL? Who owns Heartbleed? And I think as the Linux Foundation is stewards of open source, for a lot of open source, it made sense for them to create this foundation that helps promote security of open source software.
Right, and you're right about that. Linux Foundation has a lot of initiative. Actually, at one point, even there are a lot of open source projects, but they are maintained by a single maintainer. And for a lot of reasons, even financial reasons, that maintainer may or may not be interested in the project. So they made a lot of efforts in that space. Now, what I also want to understand from you that security, there's a lot of security vendors. There is a very rich ecosystem around security. So when there is already a lot of work going on in security space, what is the importance of this foundation in today's world, which once you rightly said, most of the companies are almost kind of open source has become the de facto software development model. And most of the users are moving toward the cloud native world. So talk about the importance of this foundation.
So a great analogy to think about what, why and then what, right, is if you think of cloud native is a great example where we have companies that help install and run Kubernetes, right? And they have entire business models around consulting and helping with installing of Kubernetes, right? But that doesn't mean that they don't contribute back and make upstream Kubernetes itself easy to install, easy to consume, easy to use, right? And so this idea of, it's a very 90s, I want to say, idea of vendors versus, what is in the community, right? And I think now we're in a world where, security vendors can make upstream projects more secure, more usable, better, while also being security vendors and not making that mutually exclusive, but rather a coexistence.
I mean, if you look at Linux Foundation, one of the greatest thing about the foundation is that they are able to bring different players, not only from different industries, different verticals, but also different part of the ecosystem together, under the same umbrella. And, we have talked about it earlier also so many times that we do not live in silos anymore. Whether you talk about, X, Y, Z use case or industry or even technologies. So how do you see that this foundation will further help in kind of further break, because there is no longer a silos of security. That's why we use the DevSecOps is there. Security is no longer someone else's problem. So what else do you see the value of this foundation, especially being part of Linux Foundation, because there is so much cross-pollination that happens within the foundation itself?
Yes. So I'll start with an example, maybe, right? One of the benefits that a big company gets. So if you were Google or Microsoft or Amazon, right? And let's say you've been using a C pattern in C or Java, whatever your language is. And then, like 5 years later, you realize that this pattern has a problem, right? And what you're able to do is you're able to go, in some cases, if you have a monorepo, you're able to go back and say, I'm going to undo this pattern across my entire company, right? And so the whole company benefits when any one sub project or sub team benefits. Traditionally, I think in the open source world, projects may have joint stewardship, or they might have a foundation, or sort of like an umbrella group. But in terms of security learnings, right? Security learnings are not like, they are a lot like bug fixes, but then they're also about these patterns and these institutional learnings, which a small project might not otherwise benefit from, or everyone would have to learn firsthand. And as humans, the more we learn secondhand and third hand, right, the less we have to repeat mistakes ourselves. And I really see a massive explosion just waiting to happen in security benefits from that specific point of view, where all the Linux Foundation projects can institutionalize security learnings and patterns and behaviors, and really operate like what was until now only available to a large corporation.
Since Polyverse is joining the foundation, before I talk about the foundation and your engagement, what I also want to know from you is that as we are talking that open source has kind of become the de facto or preferred software development model, cloud native or moving to cloud or digital transformation has become a critical piece of a company's strategy. Do you also see that sooner or later security will also become core part of their strategy? It will no longer be that companies start developing software and then think about security at some phase. I was talking to Alex last week, and he also said, the best time to talk about security is when you plan your software. The second best time is when you write the code, because once you deploy a code in billions of systems out there, you have already kind of lost, now you're in so talk about how do you see security will become a critical piece of software development process itself?
Yes, of course. So my thought is absolutely that you should talk about security when planning the product, right? But that is what I call logical security, right? And logical security is in another phrasing, it's policy security, right? Which is if my product handles airline transactions, right? What should it allow someone to see? What should it allow someone to edit or modify or copy, right? And these are logical decisions that you have to make. And there's no automation that can make them, right? These are value judgments that we as humans make, or as business owners or decision makers, right? And then there is a second part of this, which is the enforcement, right? That's the implementation security, which is now how do you make sure that what I logically decided should happen is then something that does happen. And the better we get at this, right, the less and less we will have to worry about enforcement security, right? The implementation of it. And, much like I actually pulled out this word the other day, and, everyone was laughing, and I think it sucks because I hate buzzwords, but much like how serverless still has servers, but you don't think about them, right? In an ideal world, we would be security less, where you focus on the policy, you focus on this piece of data, who should be able to do what with it. And past that, you shouldn't have to think about anything. And the implementation, the enforcement, the technology, the devices, the networking, all of that just happens in a correct fashion. And I think that's the opportunity that I'm very excited about in the world.
Right. And you mentioned serverless, and that is true. Serverless is more or less like a marketing term, or a term which makes sense, where you are telling developer that you don't have to manage their server side of it. You have, because whenever you are trying to build an application, you have to worry about the whole stack. You're not just thinking about your application. You do have to worry about serverless. You just focus on the application, it's done. So when you talk about you don't have to worry about security, that's very true. But the fact also remains, as you said, that there is a server in serverless. You don't deal with it. So there will be security in a security-less world. At the same time, if you look at other industries, anything, it could be a car. We always talk about cars every single time. Like those car vendors, or car manufacturers, they have the security features built into the car, but there are a whole booming ecosystem around companies who build those security technology. They embed them, but it's not, they don't do that. So as you were saying, that Polyverse won't even exist, I kind of disagree with that. Polyverse will exist, but it will not be dealing with the customer or user side of it. It will, the software vendors, or as the OpenSSF project is doing, it will start from the very beginning. You will be in Companies will engage with Polyverse before they start pushing their code out. That's what I feel, and that's what I think will be the security look like. Now, let's change the gear and talk purely about the foundation. You guys have joined the foundation. Tell me, what value are you bringing to the foundation?
I mean, I get excited about this all the time because, at a very high level, I mean, I'm just going to say this up front, which is we get more from the foundation than we bring, right? Like anyone else, any one entity will get the benefit of the other companies that are part of this. Companies, individuals, researchers, thinkers, idea people, right? Just all of that camaraderie that is a part of it brings us a lot more than we bring in. But what we do bring in is we sort of started to tackle, foundational our company is designed to solve a cybersecurity problem that is both the largest vector in the world by multiple, independent sources. But more so, we bring it to the entire Linux stack, right? The whole thing, right? Across distributions, across versions, right? And like hundreds of thousands of packages. And so what we bring, right, is the usability aspect, right? Where what we've been focused on is how can we take a problem that is widespread, and how can we take like the largest used stack in the world, and how can we then simply and easily solve this? But as we solve it, we also learn so much, and we figure out so much, and we want to bring that experience and that expertise and what little ideas and thoughts that we have around systemic security to the foundation.
You have also been nominated for the OpenSSF Security Community Individual Representative seat. Tell me a bit about what value you will bring to the seat.
Yeah, so my personal pet passion is security advocacy and security advocacy at as a default. So I always think of like we talked about fail-safe systems in the past, right? And I always think about if you did nothing, right, then by default open source software should put you in the most secure posture possible, and then you would have to do something to make it less secure, right? Or to turn that off. And that's the advocacy that I'm looking forward to bringing, both to the governing as well as to the projects, as well as just general thought leadership. So like a great example would be, in my ideal world, right? Like every open source web server, when it boots up, and if it boots up behind a domain, right, it goes to let's encrypt and generates a cert and is always SSL, and you never have to set it up. And you have to turn off SSL if you'd like, but ideally, all of those rules come by default, right? That would be a great example of something I'm passionate about. Similarly, like the OpenSSL command line, there's so much that we can do to make it more consumable, more usable. But those are sort of like concrete top of mind examples. And I also sort of, dabble in various web servers in my spare time. But that's the advocacy that I bring, just in my personal passion, and I would like to bring to the organization.
Archis, once again, thank you so much for taking time out today and talk about this new foundation and how Polyverse is going to participate. And I look forward to talk to you again. Thank you.
Thank you.